When Russian forces crossed into Ukrainian territory, the world braced for a swift conclusion. Moscow's strategy appeared straightforward: capture the capital in mere days, dismantle governmental structures, and declare victory before international opposition could mobilize. The Kremlin anticipated a lightning campaign that would reshape Eastern Europe overnight. Reality had different plans. What began as an attempted blitzkrieg has transformed into something far more significant: a grinding conflict where Ukraine has systematically rewritten the rules of modern combat. Through relentless innovation and unconventional tactics, the defending nation has turned disadvantage into opportunity, creating methods of warfare that historians will study for generations. The transformation is staggering. Where Russia expected capitulation, it found resistance. Where it deployed overwhelming force, it encountered unprecedented creativity. And where it sought quick victory, it discovered an opponent evolving faster than its bureaucratic military machine could adapt. This is the story of how a nation under siege became the architect of warfare's future. To understand Ukraine's military evolution, we must examine the weapon that changed everything: the unmanned aerial vehicle. By the opening months of 2025, these flying machines had become responsible for eliminating between 60 and 70% of all Russian military equipment, according to research from the Royal United Services Institute. Some analysts place this figure even higher. The New York Times suggested it could reach 80% by summer's midpoint. Before this conflict erupted, drone warfare at such scale existed only in theoretical discussions and limited regional conflicts. Both nations helped pioneer this deadly technology, but Ukraine perfected its application with ruthless efficiency. The mathematics of this revolution are simple yet devastating. Consider the first-person view drones that form the backbone of modern tactical air operations. These devices, assembled from commercial components and modified for combat, cost between $400 and $500 per unit. Even after customization, adding explosive payloads, improving navigation systems, enhancing communication security, these weapons rarely exceed four-figure price tags. Yet these inexpensive tools routinely eliminate Russian armor worth millions. A single tank carries a price tag between $1.5 and $4 million. Artillery systems cost $5 million. Advanced radar installations and strategic bombers capable of carrying nuclear payloads reach values in the tens of millions. The asymmetry becomes almost absurd in its implications. Operation Spiderweb, executed on the first day of June 2025, exemplified this new reality. Ukrainian forces deployed 117 FPV drones across a staggering distance, 4,300 kilometers, targeting 5 Russian airbases simultaneously. The operation destroyed or critically damaged 41 aircraft, including the formidable Tu-95MS and Tu-22M3 strategic bombers that Russia depends on for long-range strike capabilities. The financial calculation defies belief. Ukraine invested between $1,000 and $117,000 in drones, plus operational support costs. The destroyed Russian aircraft? Over $7 billion in irreplaceable strategic assets. That represents a cost-exchange ratio of approximately 1 to 58,000. For every single dollar Ukraine spent, Russia lost $58,000 in platforms that cannot be quickly replaced, given current manufacturing constraints and international sanctions. These aren't merely numbers on a spreadsheet. These bombers represented Russia's ability to project power, to threaten distant targets, to launch cruise missiles against civilian infrastructure. Each destroyed aircraft took years to construct and requires specialized facilities now operating under severe resource limitations. Beyond the pure economics lies something perhaps more powerful: psychological warfare on an unprecedented scale. Every Russian tank commander now operates with a chilling awareness. A teenager with a gaming controller flying a $400 drone from kilometers away possesses the capability to transform their $3 million armored vehicle into a burning tomb within seconds. There is no warning, no time to react, no escape. Russian pilots approaching Ukrainian-controlled airspace face similar calculations. Air defense systems and drone swarms have transformed survival probability into a grim lottery. In certain sectors, such as the recent battle for Dobrapilya, reports suggest that out of every 10 Russian soldiers attempting to advance, only one survived long enough to surrender. This wasn't accomplished through superior firepower or advanced Western technology alone. Ukraine achieved this through sheer scaling of production and deployment capabilities that would be impossible within traditional Western defense procurement frameworks. The numbers tell an extraordinary story. In 2022, Ukraine produced approximately 5,000 drones. By 2025, annual production is expected to exceed 4.5 million units, with ambitious plans to reach 10 million if funding and component supplies remain available. This represents a 3,750-fold increase in manufacturing capacity across just 3 years. To put this in perspective, Western defense programs typically require decades to field new systems, moving through layers of bureaucratic approval, testing protocols, and budget negotiations. Ukraine accomplished this through radical decentralization. Hundreds of technology companies now contribute to unmanned systems development, supported by a distributed network spanning major corporations to garage workshops. When one team discovers an improvement, a more effective explosive mechanism, a more efficient guidance system, a countermeasure to electronic jamming, that information propagates across the entire network within days through coordinating platforms like Brave One. This stands in stark contrast to Russia's approach. While state media acknowledges the military needs 120,000 additional engineers to maintain competitive parity, Ukraine's distributed model transforms every workshop into a potential innovation center. Ukrainian drones evolve faster than Russian countermeasures can adapt. The tactical applications continue advancing. Fiber-optic guided drones that resist jamming appeared in Ukrainian arsenals weeks after Russians debuted similar technology. AI-assisted systems enable swarming capabilities that overwhelm defensive installations. Development turnarounds measured in weeks mean each iteration surpasses the last in capability and effectiveness. Drone swarms exploit a fundamental weakness in conventional air defense systems. Traditional interceptor missiles launch against high-value targets, bombers, fighter jets, ballistic missiles, assuming the target represents a single entity worth millions that can be neutralized with one precise hit. Drone swarms represent the exact opposite philosophy. Cheap, interchangeable machines that keep coming regardless of initial losses. Launching an interceptor missile worth hundreds of thousands of dollars against a $400 drone wastes resources catastrophically. Swarms are vulnerable to machine gun fire and traditional weapons due to slower speeds and lower altitude profiles, but this is where numerical superiority becomes decisive. The first few drones might fall to electronic warfare or anti-aircraft fire, but if the 4th, 5th, or 10th drone reaches its target, mission accomplished. The loss rate becomes irrelevant when drones cost $400 and tanks cost $4 million. Ukraine's naval drone warfare dimension showcases asymmetric warfare at its finest. The Sea Baby drone costs approximately $200,000 to $300,000 depending on configuration. Yet this program forced Russia's entire Black Sea fleet to retreat from its primary base in Sevastopol. Warships costing hundreds of millions of dollars now hide in distant ports, rendered combat ineffective by threats that cost less than luxury vehicles. The implications are staggering. Ukraine essentially possessed no navy when the invasion began, yet it managed to seize control over Black Sea shipping lanes and revitalize grain exports to pre-war levels, all while systematically pushing one of the world's major naval powers away from its traditional sphere of dominance. While drones typically operate at low altitude, theoretically leaving them ineffective against Russia's overwhelming numerical advantage in combat aircraft, Ukraine managed to shore up this vulnerability through strategic partnerships and defensive innovation. Timely donations from Western allies provided vital Patriot defensive systems and other supportive batteries, which dissuaded Russian air operations long enough for more layered defenses to be established. The result? Russia, with roughly 1,400 combat aircraft at the war's onset, has been unable to employ its air power in any meaningful way. Most aircraft now resort to launching mid-range glide bombs while remaining outside engagement zones, severely limiting Russia's ability to control the battlefield. This forced reliance on long-range standoff weapons, but layered defenses and electronic jamming proved invaluable once again. The Center for Strategic and International Studies compiled research suggesting Ukrainian air defenses achieved average intercept rates exceeding 85% against Russian missiles and drones. Between September 2022 and 2024 alone, Ukraine successfully defended against 11,500 Russian missile attacks. But Ukraine hasn't merely defended its own airspace, it has systematically dismantled Russia's air defense capabilities. Open-source intelligence group Oryx visually confirmed the destruction of at least 17 S-400 launchers, 3 radars, and 3 tractor vehicles since the invasion began. Each S-400 system costs approximately $500 million and requires years to replace. Ukraine destroyed them using drones and missiles worth a fraction of their value. Russia's response to this crisis reveals increasing desperation. Satellite imagery captured Russian Tu-95 strategic bombers at various air bases covered with old tires, a makeshift defense against drone strikes that would be comical if it weren't so tragic. When that proved insufficient, Russia began painting aircraft to blend into backgrounds, essentially admitting it cannot spare actual protective resources for $250 million strategic bombers. Russia's defensive tactics deteriorated from inadequate to pathetic within a year, demonstrating just how effective Ukraine's strategy has become. Russia operates a massive state-controlled media apparatus, including RT, Sputnik, and domestic television networks reaching over 100 million people. Ukraine operates primarily through social media, transparency, and the credibility that comes from being the victim of unprovoked aggression. Yet Ukraine is winning decisively. Within days of the invasion, Ukrainian government social media accounts, President Volodymyr Zelensky's video addresses, and organic citizen content dominated global media channels. Images of Ukrainian farmers towing captured Russian tanks with tractors became viral symbols of asymmetric resistance. These weren't professionally produced propaganda campaigns, they were authentic documentation of life on the front line, showcasing national ingenuity in defending against a much larger adversary. Social media embraced these narratives enthusiastically. With each successful defense, Western communities rallied more forcefully behind Ukraine. When Ukraine achieved major victories independently, such as the Kursk invasion in August 2024, NATO realized it could donate substantially larger arsenals with confidence they would be employed to maximum effect. Russia responded with cyber attacks, reportedly launching over 10,000 attempts during the first 2 years. Yet Ukrainian government systems and infrastructure proved remarkably resilient. The Cyber Peace Institute documented at least 2,700 notable cyber attacks against Russian civilian agencies by Ukrainian and allied hackers, while Russian attacks numbered around 575. While Russia possesses technical sophistication and resources, Ukraine has motivation, Western technical assistance, and the moral high ground. Ukraine's information warfare strategy leverages asymmetry in another crucial dimension, exposing Russian failures to amplify psychological and geopolitical impact. When Ukrainian officials detail successful strikes on ammunition depots, oil refineries, or air bases, they're demonstrating to Russian citizens and soldiers that their government cannot protect even strategic assets deep inside Russian territory. Every successful long-range strike delivers both a direct infrastructure hit and an information warfare victory. Ukraine's campaign against targets deep inside Russian territory showcases dramatic capability expansion. Between 2022 and June 2025, Ukraine launched attacks on at least 300 major targets inside Russian territory, including ammunition depots, oil refineries, chemical plants, and strategic air bases. Operational range expanded from attacks on border regions to strikes hundreds of miles inland. Ukrainian long-range drones continue evolving, and when they prove insufficient, Ukraine has demonstrated it can execute precision strikes thousands of miles from its borders. One notable victory has been the consistent destruction of Russia's revenue-generating capabilities, specifically oil infrastructure. By some accounts, Ukrainian drones destroyed or damaged facilities representing approximately 17% of Russia's total oil refining capacity. Reuters calculated that strikes on multiple refineries directly correlated with a 17% decline in Russian oil and gas revenues between March 2024 and March 2025, a figure further reduced by Western sanctions. Ukraine clearly understands what it's targeting and is extracting every possible advantage. Beyond economic strangulation, Ukraine is preventing Russia from arming forces currently invading Donbass and neighboring regions through repeated strikes on military infrastructure, logistics channels, and supply lines. The September 2024 strike on Toropets exemplifies this approach. The attack destroyed an ammunition depot holding an estimated 30,000 tons of munitions, including recently arrived North Korean supplies. The explosion was visible from space. Ukraine's message is clear. Distance provides no protection, and Russian military assets are vulnerable everywhere. These asymmetric capabilities translate directly into economic pressure, slowly draining Russia of offensive and defensive options. Russia's military budget for 2025 reaches approximately $142 billion, representing close to a third of total government spending and roughly 7.2% of GDP. This is the highest proportion of military spending since the Soviet era. Russia is spending more on military operations than on education, healthcare, and social programs combined. The budget also contains top-secret additions that likely push true military spending beyond 40% of total government expenditure, revealing just how deep the crisis runs. Yet all that spending isn't translating into battlefield success. Oryx's visual confirmations suggest Russia has lost over 13,000 armored vehicles from the invasion's start until October 2025, including approximately 4,150 tanks. Military analyst Andriy Tarasenko warned that Russia's repairable equipment reserves could be exhausted within 12 to 18 months unless production increases to 700 to 1,000 armored vehicles annually. Yet Russia can only produce approximately 250 T-90M tanks and 460 BMP-3 infantry fighting vehicles per year. The mathematics simply doesn't work in Russia's favor. To combat equipment shortages, Russia is pulling progressively older equipment from storage. After starting with relatively modern T-72s, T-80s, and T-90s, Russia moved to T-62s by May 2022. By April 2023, Russian forces were deploying T-55s, tanks that first saw service in the 1950s. The economic asymmetry extends beyond equipment costs. Ukraine's distributed drone production model means marginal costs per unit remain incredibly low, even as production scales. Russia faces increasing costs as it depletes Soviet-era stockpiles and must rely on expensive domestic production, complicated by sanctions cutting access to advanced components. Russia's oil and gas revenues, which historically accounted for 30 to 50% of government income, plummeted 35% year-over-year by mid-2025. European Union sanctions dropped Russian oil prices by $12.4 per barrel, roughly a 15% decline. Meanwhile, Russia must compensate by squeezing its own population. Starting January 2026, Russia will increase its value-added tax from 20 to 22%, with additional revenue directed primarily to defense spending. The human toll amplifies this economic pressure. Several sources claim Russia has suffered over 1 million casualties since the invasion began. Russia's daily casualty rate is slowly increasing, rising from 560 at the war's start to over 1,300 by 2025. Each casualty requires compensation to families, medical treatment, or replacement training. As of 2025, Russia's military accounts for 3% of the country's labor force, a 40% increase from 2020. These are working-aged men systematically removed from productive economic activity. Combined with the exodus of approximately 1 million Russians who fled the country in 2022 alone, Russia is simply running out of people to work in industry or join the army. Even the military-industrial complex isn't producing results. Beyond minimal progress on the front, Russia's military exports practically disappeared by 2024. Potential customers watched Russian equipment get systematically destroyed by Ukrainian forces and naturally decided to shop elsewhere. With military production stagnating, contractors are forced to accept below-rate contracts or face being singled out by the Russian government and shut down, or worse. Russia essentially admitted that the combination of revenue decline and demographic challenges has strained the military when Putin announced a reduction in the military budget for 2026. But reducing military spending while Ukraine's capabilities continue growing is a recipe for battlefield defeat. For reference, Ukraine's military spending in 2021 was around $6 billion. By the end of 2025, it had ballooned to over $70 billion. Zelensky suggested military procurement alone is costing $25 billion, demonstrating just how vital that component of the strategy has become. While Ukraine exponentially increases its budget and uses asymmetric tactics to maximize short-term effectiveness, Russia is being forced to cut its military budget amidst major institutional bottlenecks. The effects of asymmetric warfare compound over time. Ukraine's distributed production and rapid innovation cycles mean capabilities improve continuously. Russia's centralized, corruption-plagued, sanctions-constrained system means adaptation lags perpetually behind. Traditionally, asymmetric warfare proves ineffective because the guerrilla side eventually runs out of funding, equipment, or external support. For Ukraine, this is nowhere near a concern. Donations from NATO have steadily ramped up to include not only Soviet-era and refurbished systems, but experimental designs specifically created for countering Russian capabilities. Russian President Vladimir Putin faces an impossible dilemma. He staked his political legitimacy on victory in Ukraine, admitting defeat would likely trigger a domestic political crisis. But continuing the war drains resources Russia doesn't actually have available to spend. Russia's economy is slowly reaching terminal decline, nearing a point where it can only marginally fund the war effort, but remains unable to reverse course and create growth during peacetime. Essentially, Russia is threatened by the same war machine siphoning every available resource while providing nothing in return. When the Russian population has had enough, we might witness revolutions comparable to those that toppled previous regimes throughout the region's turbulent history. Russia's only viable option is accepting defeat before costs become even more catastrophic. But given Putin's political investment in victory, Russia will likely continue paying the escalating price until the war machine breaks completely. When it does, the world will study Ukraine's asymmetric warfare revolution for decades as the moment when distributed innovation and cost-effectiveness proved decisive against conventional military power, fundamentally changing warfare forever. The story of Ukraine. NI's transformation from invaded nation to warfare innovator continues to unfold. For deeper analysis of how military strategy is evolving in real time and to stay informed about the most significant geopolitical developments shaping our world, subscribe to IntelX. We bring you daily insights into the conflicts, technologies, and strategic decisions that will define the future. Hit that subscribe button and join us as we decode the most critical military and geopolitical events of our time.